Well, it's those kinds of demonstrations of Canadian pride and nationalism that our next two guests are encouraging Canadians to embrace and protect. Charlie Angus is the NDP Member of Parliament for Timmins James Bay in Ontario. He also helped launch the Pledge for Canada. And with him today, Fareed Khan, he is the founder of the group Canadians United Against Hate. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
Hello. You know, Charlie, I'm going to get you to start us out here, because when you talk about Donald Trump making this existential tariff threat on the Canadian economy, you see this more than just an economic threat. You also see this as a threat against Canadian values. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think what's really important is for us to recognize the danger of this moment. We are in a period that's unlike anything except maybe the 1930s, and the threat to democracy, the threat to the rule of law, the threat to the international order that cost so many lives to create and defend against the fascists in the Second World War. This is the menace that Donald Trump is posting. To have a president say we don't even have a right to be a nation puts us in completely uncharted territory. And one of the things that really struck me from the get-go was ordinary Canadians understood the threat instinctively. The boycotts that we're seeing, this was all grassroots. These were ordinary Canadians saying that they wanted to stand up. What we were not seeing initially was a coherent position from our Canadian leaders, and I'm not sure if we still see that, which was one of the reasons the Pledge for Canada was created, was to try and put a frame on what is it that we actually are defending, what is it about our values that Canadians feel must be always front and foremost in any negotiations with basically a gangster regime in Washington.
Mm-hmm. And how do you define those values?
The values of the rule of law, of our inclusivity. We're seeing this horrific beating down on the vulnerable in the United States. Donald Trump's horrific videos of him at a beach resort in Gaza. Those are fundamentally anti-Canadian values. So the pledge was to lay out sort of a framework of what we will protect, and then ask people to sign on and to try and get a good cross-section of Canadian society so that we could show that this is not a partisan effort, this is not a political point of view, this is who Canadians are. And I think if you look at the signatories to that pledge, it's incredibly impressive, and it shows that Canadians understand the need right now, that we have a potentially dangerous neighbor who believes that our values, our democracy, our standards of law and inclusivity are something that they can take away from us, and we're not going to let that happen.
You use the word danger. Fareed, I'll bring you in, because you were very clear when you talk about this. You say Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to Canada. Is that reacting too strongly to what we've seen from the U.S. president?
I don't think so. All you have to do is look at his history, not just now recently when he was reelected, but also during his first presidency. And look at the language that he has used against people who he sees as, who he perceives as enemies. Charlie and I did a media conference on February 14th, and I referenced this in my remarks. There was a book written in 2017 to which 27 psychiatrists and other mental health professionals contributed. It was called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. And I referenced that in my remarks, and I'd like to reference it again here. In that book, some of the assessments that Trump's the psychiatrists and mental health professional used was Trump is an impulsive, immature, incompetent person who, when in a position of ultimate power, would easily slide into the role of tyrant. His sociopathic characteristics are undeniable and present a profound threat to democracy. He is a profoundly evil man exhibiting malignant narcissism. And this one really struck me. If left unchecked, his pathological narcissism could lead to World War III. This is the person that we are dealing with. And it's not just him. It's the people who surround him, who are enabling him, who are not doing anything to pull him back. As Charlie said, we are living in probably the most dangerous times for Canada since the 1930s. And certainly in our lifetime, we've never experienced something like this. And he is not only a threat to our national integrity and our sovereignty, but he is a threat to every Canadian. And I think that Canadians are slowly coming to realize this, but it needs to move faster. Our politicians need to be moving faster. And the media need to start talking about Trump in this sort of language to convey the very real threat that he is to all of us.
You know, Charlie, you were in Munich just a couple weeks ago.
Brussels.
Brussels, in Europe, just a couple weeks ago. When you speak to the other allies, when you speak to people who are politicians in other countries dealing with this, is anyone standing up for Canada right now?
So I was at the NATO meetings just after J.D. Vance launched a full-on assault on Western democracy in Munich. The Munich conference stunned the world. And what really struck me in Brussels was the confusion and the terror amongst our allies. I was really going to Brussels expecting that we'd see strong positions from the French, from the Germans, from the UK. They were still tiptoeing around, and it fell to Canada, it fell to me as a delegate to stand up and call this out, to say what happens to NATO, what happens to the Western alliances when we have a government that is actually one of the main partners is trying to undermine and threaten. And then I began to hear, because I think I spoke up, you know, the Baltic states, they're right on Putin's front line. Romania is really concerned that J.D. Vance is undermining their democracy. We started to hear from people who recognize now that Trump is doing Putin's bidding, undermining Ukraine, undermining the rule of law, and nobody's coming to save Canada. That's the message I brought back. The Europeans, I think, really understand the need to be allied with nations like Canada, but we are on our own, and we're going to have to rethink this. And as Fareed said, our politicians need to get a game plan very quickly. This isn't something, well, we're just going to, you know, deal with a fentanyl czar and deal with some problems on the border, and we're going to go back to normal. We have to fundamentally rethink our economy. We're going to have to rethink our defense. We're going to have to rethink our whole diplomatic approach if we have a potentially malignant threat on our 5,000-mile border. Where is Canada going to be in the world? Saying all that, I feel very, very positive that Canadians get it. Canadians are strong. Canadians will get through this. But we need to have a framework, which is, again, going back to the pledge, was why we really felt the necessity on the eve of the first round of threats to get a statement out there to say this is who we are as a nation, to get people all across the board, from, you know, Kim Campbell to Danny Williams to Arcade Fire to Indigenous activist Pam Palmatier to our labor leaders, coming together and saying across the spectrum of Canadian voices, we believe that they're fundamental Canadian values. And these are fundamental values we will fight for, and these are fundamental values we will never, ever trade to a gangster who's threatening us.
Okay, so what do you want to see here? You know, Fareed, you come to this as Canadians United Against Hate. What do you want to see happen from the leadership in this country? Because already Canadians are boycotting American goods. They're canceling trips to the United States. What more do you want to see happen?
Well, what I'd like to see is our national leaders and our provincial leaders use the sort of language that describes Donald Trump as Charlie has, using the words that Charlie has used. He's a gangster, he's a thug, he's a racist, he's an enabler of white supremacy, he's an Islamophobe, and all we have to do is look at the executive orders that he has signed off on attacking migrants, attacking the transgender community, attacking the LGBTQ2 community, attacking refugees. This is a man who thrives on hate. And we saw it in his first administration, and the result of his language was that a Canadian white supremacist walked into a mosque in Quebec City just after he had been inaugurated the first time and murdered 6 Muslim men while they were praying. He enabled white supremacy in Canada through the use of this language. They became emboldened. So what I would like to see from our leaders is to stop pussyfooting around, stop using polite diplomatic language, and look at him as the threat that he is, not just to Canada, but to the world. I mean, to quote once again that the line from that book is that, this is a man who could start World War III. And we are the front lines. I've seen this analogy used previously, and people have started looking at the U.S. like the same way that Nazi Germany was observed in the 1930s. If the U.S. is Nazi Germany, then we are Austria, which Nazi Germany annexed in the lead up to World War II. So this is the threat that we are facing, and we have to push back not only against the politics and the economic threat that he has presented to us. We need to push back at the very core of who he is, which is the hate that he engenders and that he enables through his public statements. And Canada is in danger. All Canadians are in danger, and everybody needs to wake up and smell the coffee, and especially our top leaders, not just our provincial premiers, but the man or the woman who ends up becoming the leader of the Liberal Party and who would then become Prime Minister. They need to start talking in language that is forceful more than what they have been doing, and to basically stand behind what Canadians already realize, that this man could basically destroy our nation.
Charlie, quickly running out of time, what do you want to see?
I want to reiterate my intense pride in ordinary Canadians. I've never seen anything like the outpouring of determination, and it reminds me that, Canada has always stood against extremism. Canada stood up to fascists. When we were a nation of 11 million people, we had the fourth largest Navy in the world, fourth largest Air Force. Our soldiers fought all across Europe to fight Nazis, and many of our relatives never came home from that. That's our tradition. That's who we are. We need now to have a national Canada focus, that we are dealing with a malignant threat. I don't think it's about being afraid. I think it's about being determined. And I know Canada will get through this, but we cannot have our provincial premiers trying to cut side deals. We cannot have people tiptoeing around and hoping that it's all just an act. It's not an act. Canadians get that. We really do need our political leaders to understand the size of the threat, and we need to be working at the international level to start finding alliances with like-minded countries who will create some kind of alternative to the world that we're in right now.
Charlie Angus, Fareed Khan, thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.